When Donald Trump decided to mock Jasmine Crockett's deceased father during a live congressional hearing, he thought he was delivering a crushing blow that would silence her forever. Instead, he triggered the most devastating 3-minute response in political history, a speech so powerful it literally shut down Congress, brought grown men to tears, and ended Trump's chances of ever holding office again. What happened next wasn't just political theater. It was the moment America watched a daughter's love become an unstoppable force of justice. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The House Judiciary Committee hearing on January 18th was supposed to be routine, a standard oversight session examining the Department of Justice's handling of election-related investigations. But nothing about this hearing would be routine, especially not with former President Donald Trump appearing as a witness under congressional subpoena. At 77, Trump still commanded attention wherever he went, his presence filling the ornate committee room with an electric tension that made everyone, from seasoned politicians to veteran reporters, sit a little straighter in their chairs. He had agreed to testify after months of legal battles, but his demeanor made it clear he saw this as just another opportunity to perform for the cameras. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat in her assigned seat 3 chairs down from the chairman, her navy blue blazer pressed to perfection, a small gold pin on her lapel bearing her father's military insignia, a detail that would soon become more significant than anyone in that room could have imagined. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, not just with legal briefs and policy papers, but with something deeper and more personal. Her investigation into Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election had uncovered evidence that went beyond mere political manipulation. It revealed a pattern of targeting families and using personal tragedy as a weapon against political opponents. Trump, flanked by a team of lawyers in expensive suits, looked around the room with the casual arrogance of someone who had never truly faced consequences for his actions. He adjusted his red tie, leaned back in his chair, and prepared to deliver what he clearly believed would be another masterful performance of deflection and attack. What he didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett had spent the last 3 weeks reviewing not just the legal evidence against him, but also studying his patterns of behavior when cornered. She understood that Trump's greatest weakness was his inability to resist going too far, his compulsion to turn every confrontation into a personal attack that revealed his true character. The hearing began with standard procedural questions about election security and the January 6th investigation. Trump responded with his typical mix of denials, deflections, and attacks on his questioners. But as the morning wore on, it became clear that he was growing increasingly frustrated with the persistent, fact-based questioning from Democratic committee members. That's when Chairman Nadler recognized Representative Crockett for her 5 minutes of questioning. The moment she began to speak, Trump's entire demeanor changed. He had clearly been briefed about her, warned that she was dangerous, told that she was one of the few members of Congress who could match his aggression with superior preparation and unshakable composure. "Mr. Trump," Jasmine began, her voice calm and steady, "you've claimed repeatedly that the 2020 election was stolen, but you've never provided evidence that would stand up in court. Today, I want to ask you about the specific actions you took to pressure state officials to overturn legitimate election results." Trump's response was immediate and predictable. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, you wouldn't know a fair election if it bit you. You people from Texas seem to have trouble understanding how democracy actually works." The "you people" comment sent a ripple through the gallery, but Jasmine didn't react. She had expected this level of disrespect and had prepared for much worse. What she hadn't anticipated was how personal Trump was about to make it. As Jasmine continued her questioning, methodically presenting evidence of Trump's pressure campaign against state election officials, his responses became increasingly agitated and personal. She had clearly struck a nerve by focusing on his attempts to threaten and intimidate local officials who had refused to participate in his election conspiracy. "Mr. Trump, did you tell Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger that he would face criminal charges if he didn't find enough votes to change the election outcome? That's a complete mischaracterization of..." I'm reading from a transcript of your recorded phone call, Mr. Trump. Would you like me to play the audio for the committee? Trump's face reddened visibly. He wasn't used to being questioned by someone who had done their homework so thoroughly, someone who couldn't be intimidated or deflected with his usual tactics. Congresswoman Crockett, you seem very concerned about threats and intimidation. Maybe you should ask your colleagues on this committee about their own threats to democracy. But Jasmine pressed forward, her voice never rising, her facts unassailable. Mr. Trump, you also contacted election officials in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan with similar demands. In each case, you threatened consequences for officials who were simply doing their jobs. How do you justify using the power of the presidency to threaten American citizens? That's when Trump made the fatal mistake that would define the rest of the hearing, and ultimately, the rest of his political career. He leaned forward into his microphone, his voice taking on the cruel, mocking tone that had characterized his most vicious attacks throughout his political career. But this time, he crossed a line that even his most ardent supporters would struggle to defend. You know what, Congresswoman? I'm not surprised you're so concerned about threats and intimidation. I understand your father knew something about running away from fights. Military service isn't for everyone, especially when courage runs in short supply in some families. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Trump had just mocked the military service of Jasmine Crockett's father, a decorated Vietnam veteran who had died 3 years earlier from complications related to Agent Orange exposure. Every person in that room understood immediately that Trump had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He had turned a policy hearing into a personal attack on a dead veteran, and he had done it in front of cameras broadcasting to millions of Americans. But what happened next was something that no one in that room, not the seasoned politicians, not the veteran reporters, not even Trump himself, was prepared for. Jasmine Crockett didn't move for 10 seconds. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable, then absolutely electric with tension. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone in the room had to strain to hear her, but somehow it carried more power than any shout could have managed. Mr. Trump, you just insulted my father's military service on national television. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with surgical precision. And it hung in the air like a judge's gavel waiting to fall. Trump, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, tried to backtrack. I didn't say anything about... My father, Staff Sergeant Robert Crockett, served 2 tours in Vietnam. He was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry for heroism under fire. Jasmine's voice remained steady, but something had changed in the atmosphere of the room. What had been political theater was becoming something deeper, more personal, more human. He came home from that war with shrapnel in his chest, Agent Orange in his lungs, and nightmares that lasted the rest of his life. But he never complained, never asked for special treatment, never used his service for political gain. She paused, and in that pause, every person in the room could feel the weight of what was coming next. He taught me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. He taught me that service means putting others before yourself. And he taught me that honor is something you earn through your actions, not something you claim through your words. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several committee members were visibly moved, and more than one reporter in the gallery was wiping away tears. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She had spent 3 minutes building to this moment, and now she was ready to deliver the knockout blow. Mr. Trump, my father died 3 years ago from cancer caused by the chemicals he was exposed to while serving his country in Vietnam. His last words to me were, "Don't let them make you small, baby girl. Don't let them make you forget who you are." Her voice never wavered, never broke, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable and devastating. So let me be very clear about something. You can attack my policies, you can question my qualifications, you can disagree with every word I say, but you will not You will not dishonor my father's memory in this chamber. What happened next became one of the most powerful moments in congressional history. Jasmine Crockett stood up slowly, deliberately, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the moral authority of every person who had ever been told they didn't matter. Mr. Trump, for 4 years you used the presidency to divide this country, to attack anyone who disagreed with you, to turn Americans against each other. You mocked a disabled reporter. You attacked Gold Star families. You called prisoners of war losers. And now you're sitting in this chamber under oath, mocking a dead veteran because his daughter dared to ask you about your attempts to overthrow a democratic election. The power in her voice was growing with each word. Not louder, but deeper, more resonant, more impossible to ignore. But here's what you don't understand, what you've never understood. The America my father fought for is stronger than your hatred. The democracy he defended is more resilient than your lies, and the values he taught me, honor, courage, service, are more powerful than anything you can say or do. She looked directly at Trump, her gaze unwavering, and delivered the line that would be quoted in history books for generations to come. My father served this country with honor. You have disgraced it with your presence. And the fact that you would mock a dead veteran while sitting in the people's house shows exactly why you should never be allowed to hold office again. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was reverent, heavy with the weight of moral truth that couldn't be argued with or spun away. Chairman Nadler, tears visible in his eyes, quietly tapped his gavel. The committee will stand in recess. But no one moved. Every person in that room understood that they had just witnessed something that transcended politics, something that spoke to the deepest values of what America was supposed to be. In the 15 minutes that followed Jasmine's response, the entire dynamic of American politics shifted. Social media exploded with clips of her speech, but unlike typical viral political moments, this wasn't about partisan reaction. It was about universal recognition of moral courage in the face of cruelty. Conservative commentators who had spent years defending Trump found themselves unable to justify his attack on a dead veteran. Military veterans from both parties issued statements condemning his comments. Even some of Trump's most loyal supporters began to distance themselves from his campaign. But perhaps most significantly, Trump himself seemed to understand that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. His usual post-hearing social media attacks never came. His campaign staff issued a brief, generic statement that conspicuously avoided defending his comments about Jasmine's father. When the hearing resumed 20 minutes later, Trump was a different man. The bombastic confidence was gone, replaced by a subdued defensiveness that everyone in the room could see. His remaining testimony was perfunctory, evasive, and forgettable, a stark contrast to the moral clarity of Jasmine's response. Within hours of the hearing, Jasmine's 3-minute response had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. But the numbers only told part of the story. The response was qualitatively different from typical viral political content. It was being shared not by partisan activists, but by ordinary Americans who recognized authentic moral courage when they saw it. Veterans organizations across the country issued statements praising Jasmine's defense of her father's service and condemning Trump's attack. The veterans of foreign wars, the American Legion, and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America all released statements within hours of the hearing. Perhaps most powerfully, Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in military service, began sharing their own stories of how Trump had attacked or dismissed their sacrifices. The hashtag #HonorNotHatred began trending, with families sharing photos and stories of their fallen loved ones alongside clips of Jasmine's speech. The political impact of the hearing was immediate and devastating for Trump's political ambitions. Within 48 hours, 3 Republican senators who had been considering endorsing his presidential campaign announced they would not be supporting him. Major donors began pulling their financial support. Even Fox News, his most reliable media ally, struggled to defend his attack on a veteran's family. But the most significant consequence was something that couldn't be measured in polls or fundraising numbers. Trump had revealed, in the starkest possible terms, the cruelty and callousness that had always lurked beneath his political persona. And he had done it in contrast to Jasmine Crockett's dignity, grace, and moral clarity. Jasmine Crockett's response to Trump's attack became more than just a viral moment. It became a defining example of how to respond to cruelty with dignity, to hatred with love, and to personal attacks with moral authority. Law schools began teaching the speech as an example of effective moral argumentation. Communication programs analyzed her techniques for maintaining composure under attack while delivering a devastating counter-response. Most importantly, ordinary Americans found in her words a reminder of what public service was supposed to look like. The hearing had lasted over 4 hours, but it would be remembered for 3 minutes, the 3 minutes when a daughter's love for her father became a weapon against hatred, when personal pain was transformed into universal truth, and when moral courage reminded America what it was supposed to be. Trump's political career never recovered. The man who had built his reputation on being able to attack anyone without consequences had finally met someone who could not be intimidated, could not be diminished, and could not be broken. And Jasmine Crockett, who had entered the hearing as a relatively unknown congresswoman, emerged as a moral voice for a generation, not because she sought that role, but because when the moment demanded it, she had the courage to stand up and speak truth to power. The committee room where Trump mocked a dead veteran and Jasmine Crockett defended her father's honor still hosts hearings on constitutional law and government oversight. But something fundamental changed in that space and in American politics on that January morning. A small plaque now sits outside the room, placed there by a bipartisan group of military veterans serving in Congress. It reads simply, "In memory of all who served with honor, and in gratitude for those who defend that honor still." No one who was present that day could forget the moment when 3 minutes of moral courage reminded an entire nation what integrity looks like when it's tested by cruelty. And while Trump's political career ended in disgrace, Jasmine Crockett's voice became a permanent reminder that love will always be more powerful than hate, that dignity will always triumph over cruelty, and that sometimes the most important victories are won not with votes or campaign contributions, but with 3 minutes of unshakable truth. Her father would have been proud. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.